I get my hat back on. I gotta. All right. So here's my minimal viable product, right?
Okay.
So I can put in whatever NACE code, right? So what are the big? This is probably the biggest one I think I've ever seen, and I've shared this to you before, right?
Yeah.
Where I have kind of like the wrap rate calculations. Well, I did another incremental increase to the statement of work with my software guy. He's amazing, right? And so we have this average rate. So I can pull a NACE code average rate. Again, it's basically the average salaries versus the average markup across the industry. I use that as kind of a ceiling rate. Again, I can narrow down the specificity. This is just a generic call to all the businesses under that NACE code in the US, but I have the ability to put it into, give me this state, give me a veteran-owned business, or give me a woman-owned business or a minority-owned business. And then the minority-owned business I can get into, is it, African-American, Latino, Filipino, etc. Right. And so, but I don't think anybody cares about that right now. I'm just doing kind of a proof of concept, figuring out there's market there. Cause I was effectively like, one of the answers was, or the questions was, how do you know you're getting traction for your company? I was like, well, I grew 243% last year, and I'm looking at over 200% this year. And the feedback I got from the guy who won an award was basically like, keep it super concise. Like, don't, I had like 2,500 characters I can use, but like, if I can, distill it into 30 characters, great. I grew my business that I will grow it this year. Again, that simple.
Have to, like, I mean, if we're talking government contracts, because it's like engineering stuff, you don't have to worry about SCA stuff, right? I mean,
I deal with SCA stuff, right? Like, so yeah, I'm trying to develop an API into sam.gov that retrieves the SCA WDs, but I haven't figured out how to do that, and I'm not there yet anyway. But I had him add the small business standards, right? As there's some that are based off of number of employees. But here's the thing that I really added and I like. Okay. So, disregard these two data points, but he tapped into USA spending to pull the last 5 years or so spending. And the biggest one, I think this is the biggest NACE code used by the government, right? So $41 billion in spending.
So that's just across the whole government under that NACE code. Gotcha.
Yeah. And I'm looking like these calcs are a bit off. These need to be inverted, right? Because this is a positive growth, right? 41 to 40. So we'll need to, again, it's all beta, but I'm just trying to, and the thing was, I've been developing this to kind of, for marketing purposes, to kind of get eyeballs to come into my site. I've been sending the direct link to people, but I have a way now to give them, they can create a login, and then they would get access to that link effectively.
So real quick, on the percentage, is that just, so yeah, you're saying how it's inverted or something there. Is that just a matter of the software guy going in and like as if it's an Excel sheet and redoing the formula?
Yeah, I think so. He just needs to reverse it, right? Because this is likely a 1.3% positive growth. A negative growth in me means it was declining, right? So I can see very quick, it went from 39 billion to 37 billion. It's showing a almost 4% increase. So I think we just need to, do if it's a minus, create a plus. I don't know. That's why I pay him, right? But I know how to do the formulas in Excel.
I wouldn't market that too heavy until you get to percent change to reflect accurately.
Right. And again, I'm learning, it's taken years, dude, to figure out how to clearly communicate the requirements that I need. But, I mean, all of these are calcs, right? So I was like, take this number, divide it by 2080, and then multiply it by the wrap rate. That is also a calc, right? So it's, this has been probably the third or fourth iteration of it. But I really think now I'm kind of at a loss for how I want to, the next phase I want to add into it. Part of me wants to go, okay, well, here's the biggest PSC codes out of that NACE code. Or part of me is like, maybe I want to do, here's the top 10 agencies, or here's the top 10 companies getting that money in that NACE code. But then I'm starting to remember the whole point of me creating a SaaS product was to do price estimating. And so I'm really happy with the way not necessarily the colors, but I like the way the graphs are portrayed, right? So this is the labor cost, this line here. This is the revenue cost. So the spread, which is this ratio in pink, right, is the difference between the revenues and the payroll.
Yeah.
So it works better for services-based business. It's a little bit off. It's off, by a lot in some cases when you're talking about heavy investments, capital expenditures, real estate expenses, etc. Right. So again, I'm just using it as a starting point, but I really want to take in what are the top 10 labor categories that are worked in this NACE code. That makes sense.
Sure,
and so I can get that information, but the challenge that I have is the Bureau of Labor Statistics doesn't break it down into 6 digits. It only breaks it down into the 2 digits.
Oh, wow.
Right?
Yeah. Pretty broad.
Yeah. So everything that I get under either of these would show the exact same top 10. But again, I'm like, okay, this is one aspect of it. If I wanted to do the cost builds, I'm thinking, I've used this information to kind of scale a little bit of my business, right? Like I can do quick insights using the tool. It saves me time. I can use these average rates as a data point to say this NACE code is this. So I'm going to do an easy analysis. Here's how many hours you're asking for. So this is a $106 million bid, right? Based off of the rate in 2017, which then I could inflate by 3% each year, compounded, et cetera. But it looks like some of these have not jumped much. So it doesn't seem like there was much of a jump. It was a negative amount from that year to that year. So again, the whole point is to create a minimal viable product. But I was like, if I can add in the labor categories to this, I think now we're talking about I can potentially start monetizing this and people use it for labor estimates.
Yeah,
right?
And I've always thought this, John. You really have almost 2 different things there, right? I mean, statistics are so powerful, data statistics, because I mean, you can derive so much out of that, being as creative as you want to determine what you want to present. I mean, I've always felt that, just with the idea of marketing behind it, even if the product is just, providing that data in a concise way, I mean, you've got it to where you can pull so much stuff. And again, if you're creative, put it out in a way that's different or unique, or just more intuitive, or not intuitive, but just more conducive to what individual people are like looking for, that they haven't figured out how to, how to gather before. I mean, there really is just some good data, opportunities there.
And that's kind of where I'm struggling a little bit with the primary use case, right? Because again, I was thinking from, okay, my experience as a contracts manager and a pricer, I would love a tool that would be able to, validate prices that I pay. Like if I don't have John's pay stub or Chris's letter of intent with a salary, I, use the paid salary survey data, or I go to a free source and explain how, I think 80K is the right number for this type of person with this quals and, at this location, et cetera. So there is a wealth of data that the Bureau of Labor Statistics does, and they update it once a year. So, there's about 800 or 900 different labor categories to go along with, 800 or so different locations in America. So I can tell you, like, in Eastern Washington State, what the average pay is, how many people work in that place, and then what the top labor categories are, like where are most people employed in what fields, right? So again, I'm struggling with, the right algorithm, so to speak, given that I can't get the specificity I can as a 6-digit NACE code.
Yeah.
But here's the thing. So I asked him to be able to do a roll up. So I can do a 5-4, right? And let me do a 3. A 3-3 doesn't work because it's funny how. So let me do an educational one, right? So we can look at the real macro level of 5-4s and 6-1s. And it was like little minor things about how to tweak the searches, right? Because before I would do like 5-4, and it would give me things that ended with 5-4.
Oh yeah,
and
sure.
I was like, no, I needed to start with, because and then it would run out of space because there's a lot of 5/4s, in the wherever else in the sequence of numbers. So I said no, and that was a big help. It's something I didn't think of. But so here's where I was going with this is,
your mind, you have to now you have to understand back end coding and how all this stuff works,
Right. And I tried for years to learn how to do some basic coding, and I learned enough to be able to better communicate with people who can actually do that,
Right.
but it's just not worth my time. I've spent, decades honestly learning how to do programming, and first in, what the hell was that thing, DOS and BASIC, C++, Turbo Pascal. I mean, I've taken those courses in high school and college and stuff, and I took a Java class after college and was just like, I don't get this stuff. It doesn't.
But you've now qualified yourself to be an agile project manager.
Right. Exactly. And my brother actually is one, sort of. So he's been really helping me, when he has time, and so it's taken 4 years to get to where I've been at right here. But this is, what I was trying to do ultimately is going, hey, anything in 5/4, 2/5 is probably about the top end of a wrap rate, right? Educational services look like they have a little bit higher markups, but maybe there's more overhead in terms of, needing to do papers and binders and all this other stuff. The school facilities, I don't really know. I'm not getting into the weeds of this right now, not in this sector anyway. And so this obviously doesn't really work with a 2-digit, right? So this just plucks any first one on there. But we could say on average, 15.5 is the right threshold between a small and large. But we know that accounting ones may be 12%, 12.5 mil, and the IT ones may be 40.1 million or whatever. But the funny thing is I had this updated like in mid-December, and then as it got incorporated into the app, the SBA literally updated every single revenue one within that day.
Oh shit! Yeah.
And so I had to luckily he was flexible. So just repoint it to this table instead, because all my 38.5s went to 41s, all the 41s went to 43s. Because they were indexing everything per inflation.
Does he have the capability, or within that API, to do an auto pull on that, or do you have to go in and repoint it to new updates? I mean, that's just important to know. Like, if there's it's hard. It's gonna be hard for you to keep track of every update that's out there by having to go in and like manually
I have a feeling it's going to be kind of manual. So I have it mapped out the static data versus the the data that can be fetched instantly. So all of this stuff is fairly static. They're not updating these data sets every day, right? No. They're updating them every 5 years or every year. And in case of the inflationary index, I can do one monthly for consumer and producer prices, and then the quarterly one, which is the employment index, and that's the one I use for escalations, right? So I put some blogs around, hey, last it was 5.3, and then it's leveled to 5.1, but still it's way higher than the average 3.5 that we see from contractors. Right. But here's the other deal that I kind of noticed, and this 2-digit right here, it looks like it's only fetching the highest spending. So this is the same number as the 533s or the 330s, the engineering one.
Okay.
Right? The exact same numbers. So this doesn't count every single thing under 5.4, right? So we would need to do some sort of calc akin to a sum if starts with 5.4, right? And then get all the things under 5.4, because this should be hundreds of billions of dollars, if not $1 trillion.
Right. And that's important, man. I mean, you don't want to be putting out data that's wrong, right? I mean, there's so many data points you really have to use. The person putting that in, if they're doing a calc, like they really have to make sure that it's factoring for everything, or else you're going to be.
I mean, it is mapping. I mean, I haven't. I've been. He just did this, I think, over the weekend, and I just started looking at it yesterday evening. I was like, oh, awesome, he's got it in here. Again, I'm noticing the little things about like we talked about before. These are inverted, and I told him that last time. I don't think he understood what I was talking about. I didn't explain it well, in the sense that it looks like the 2 digits just fetching the tallest one, the tallest volume, and then just sucking that one in as the number. And I'm like, no, I'm telling him how to do it in Excel, but I don't know how he's doing it with the programmatic one. But it's like starts with
but like how I do it in Excel, which again, I'm pretty good at spreadsheets and formulas too. But when I used to run like a huge capital planning like forecast for like hundreds of projects, and gosh, if you mess up one formula and it's dragged and dropped, like you really got to make sure like every cell has like the accurate formula or is locked so they can't be manipulated, because man,
absolute and relative references are so important. I was just doing this project, it's like $110 million for 4 years, and we were making all these changes, and I was like, I rebuilt the model from scratch because the one that was inherited, the pricer left, and I was looking at it and I'm like, this is way too complex for what it's doing, right? Because there were like 10 tabs, 3 of which look like they did the same thing. I was like, this is too confusing. I didn't build this. I don't want to put something in here. And because I kept finding things that like, oh, this drives all these things.
Right, exactly.
And so I was just like, I'm going to start from scratch.
You have to click every cell to see where it's all coming from.
It's not hard though once you know how to architect those things. So like I have one main reference sheet, I have one main summary sheet, and then I have one main like sandbox where people can, this many hours, this different labor category, this subcontractor versus this, the prime, and then I rebuilt it again yesterday because I was not happy with some of the changes we'd added, and I didn't factor them in. Like as an example, we were doing some things with subcontractors, and then we were doing some things that we were like buying some licenses from resellers. So there's a different load on those, right? Like one's getting like a G&A load, one's getting like a material handling load. And it's like, oh, I didn't factor that in. And then one guy, we had a little goof because I had loaded the subcontractor rates. We pay $100 to the sub, and then we charge like, 112, and like 5% is a G&A.
Sure. Right.
Right. And then like 8% is a fee, and then it comes out to, whatever it was. So then it kept having these permutations to where I made these changes, and I was like, you know what? I'm not real confident that all these changes are right, because now I'm doing these things a lot more manually. And then I remember twice I made changes like, oh crap, I made it on the wrong tab. I forgot that this tab was pulling everything from that tab. And I was like, you know what? These tabs are doing the same thing, but I'm like intersprinkling which one is the important one. I was like, it got too, so it's part of the process. So I'm really trying to, it's a really good opportunity for me too, because they have a new pricer now. So I'm like, let's figure out a good end state, or at least a better model that, your technical team can do the basis of estimate, and then they can see what the total number is, but they won't see like, what the salaries are and, what the fully loaded rates are. Because again, they want to keep a little bit of that, unbiased a little bit. But it was like, we're going to hit $120 million. Here's the BOE. Oh, we're way out of the water. And then, me and the other people who are privy to the pricing information, then we have, we use all that and suck it into our model. And then we can actually go, okay, well, what if we discounted this labor rate from, instead of 50th percentile, we use the 40th percentile, or we use the 80th percentile, because those are, need a higher degree. They need a Q clearance rather than the normal one, or, and we can add whatever kind of lever we need to, which again, I've learned. And just today, they're like, they had a manual, and it was like, I was using the same rates as the last bid we had for this client. And I was like, oh, these rates don't match. So I sent a note out to everybody, hey, to kind of cover CYA for me, but also the internal people. Because again, I can get fired at any moment if I screw something up. That's fine. I'm easy to be dispensable. So I don't want that, of course. But so I provided some top cover, and I did not expect to hear what I got this morning, which was, oh yeah, our rates are way higher than that now, and blah blah blah. I'm like, oh, well, we'd worked really hard on the BOE to get it under a certain threshold, right? Because it was like 99,399,000. I was like, oh, that's a good number, right? Slightly under 99.4, and then we moved everything up, and it went to like 101.5 with a different G&A rate. So I just modeled like, okay, if we had this G&A rate, this G&A rate, that G&A rate, here's the total prices. And part of me also, every time I see that, it's confusing because I'm looking at like a 3% jump, but then the prices only don't go up 3%.
Yeah, I mean, you'd think 3% jump. Okay, I can just flow that out, right? Just add your time.
Yeah, then it's weighted here, and then it's added to fee on there, and so I'm still trying to figure out the algebra again, because I like to build in like a couple layers of cross checks,
Yeah.
sum it this way and sum it that way, and then see if, because independently they should match. It's just different way of calculating. And then so I was pretty happy when I rebuilt it that I didn't spend a ton of time monkeying around, because it basically, the math worked out. And I'd had problems with that before, in particular with like T&M contracts, where you round the pennies, right? Because it's like 1880 or 1920 times $50 an hour. In reality, with the cost plus builds that most contractors use, there's truncated pennies. So it's really like 49,965, blah, 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 right?
What
and
are you
so,
doing?
Right. Yeah. So when you round it off, you're up $8 or you're minus $8. It's about, anywhere around $16 is about, 2,000 hours in a fraction of a penny. That's a tolerable error,
Right.
or discrepancy. So, I mean, I've had tens of thousands of dollars of rounding errors, in $20 million bids. And I'm like, it's the way that the client asks us to build it up. You want a rate build, and then you want a bottom line. Like, here's how much direct labor, and then here's fringe, here's overhead. I'm like, I'm not rounding these numbers, right? So I'm off by $8 or $30 on all these lines. And if it's 10,000 hours, then I'm off a little bit more. I'm off by $400, right? But again, it's all tolerable with the amount of hours and all that stuff. So anyway, I don't like getting things rounded, but I was taught that on T&M, it's important to round, because, people who evaluate will kind of do their own calcs. Like, wait a minute, this is off by, a couple $100. These guys don't know what the hell they're doing. And so I always caveat, there may be immaterial rounding differences.
Yeah.
But then again, some places I've worked at were real anal about the rounding stuff. And I was explaining to them, then I can't round it. If I don't round it, I don't have the error. But if I do round it, then I have the errors.
Right.
So it's 6 of one, half a dozen in the other. But
right.
So, but I'm happy with, again, I think it was a sense of, I didn't explain it well. And I think last time I was looking at the angle of, okay, I want to get a grant from my state. So how do I do that? And I was like, okay, I like to work with like small disadvantaged minority owned businesses, which is true, and help them win more government contracts. All that is true, but I don't think they gave a crap about that. And that's okay.
What is the goal of their grant program? Like, what
they want to basically fund companies that are going to be like $50 billion companies in 5 years. Right.
Nice.
So,
I mean, what are they giving you money for? What is the goal of the money?
To create an investment that would like supercharge the growth, I think, is the intent, right? For scalable businesses. So I said, I've developed a tool at my own expense. I don't have any outside investment. I've spent my own money in this. It's hard to quantify, right? How much I'm specific. Well, it's not hard, but it's anything that I have an additional profit, I'm kind of putting into here. Sure. Right. So I said, this has enabled me to scale my business. It's grown over 240% last year. I'm forecasting, as we talked about earlier, I've made over half what I made last year already on the accrual basis. Right. It's a little different in the cost, the cash basis. Because again, I haven't been paid in April for stuff I did, in February, or, most of my terms are, net 15, but this big client that I was telling you about, that big check I got, was net 30. And then I didn't get paid at all from that client in February for work I did in January, but it just hit today. So again, 30 days. So, figures lie, liars figure, but I'm smart enough to know about the accounting stuff and to know that. So, I'm on the right path, but I think they didn't think I was, they thought I was a lifestyle company or like a management consulting company that's just doing training and education. Right. And all of that is pretty accurate, but I want to use this SaaS product to create a bigger platform to be able to scale the education, scale the training, and enable me to monetize more of my services and as a product. But also, if I add in, other features to this, like specifically the labor categories, then someone can say, hey, I'm looking for cyber people. Okay, here's all the cyber direct labor rates. Which NACE code is it? And then it would apply the markup and say, this is a rate, right? And then it would take the 10% and the 90th percent and say, these are fair and reasonable rates, anywhere from 110 and 250, right? I want a big range of fair and reasonableness. Because again, when you look at, price to win, it's, people kind of hone me in on a number sometimes, and I'm like, a penny lower than your competitor if it's LPTA.
Yeah, there's nothing, backing you into a number. It's like, let's not build it up the way you should. Here's the number, now back in to make that work. You got to be able to do it both ways, but it's a little different process.
Precisely. It's like a top down and bottoms up. So I would use this as a top up. I'm sorry, a bottoms down.
Yeah.
Wait,
what?
A top down.
Top. Okay.
Right.
Yeah,
like, it's like, just like I would use GSA.
Yeah.
I would use GSA Calc or GSA pricing estimating tool now, but GSA rates we know are ceiling rates. So if I'm using GSA ceiling rates to establish a fair and reasonable range, a lot of people do that. But I want to have another alternative, again, for my top and down. But basically the top is, whatever the government says they're going to spend.
Sure.
And so one use case is you can use this for your IGEs. How many people do you need? Okay, which NACE code? So in a very simple one, it's like, okay, I have average of 10 people in a business under this NACE code. Their average rate's $98 an hour. How many people do you need? Oh, okay. Well, we need, 25 people, and then 25 times 1880, 1920 times that rate. There's a number, but again, how accurate is that number? I don't know. I mean, I'm using the data to make better decisions, help my clients win more work. At the end of the day, it's like, how aggressive do you want to be? How desperate do you want to win this? Is it LPTA? Then, we might have to be a little bit desperate to get to some prices. Oh, it's SCA? Well, shoot, your wrap rate of 1.8 is not good at all for SCA work. It's very good in other types of NACE codes, right? High-end work, that's a very reasonable wrap rate. So anyway, so I'm a little bit more confident this time that I'll at least get, invited to, interview people who actually looked at it. Because again, I think it was helpful to kind of flesh out some of the things. Because, I had things like, oh, I've had, 671 hits to my website in the last 6 months. Oh, I have, 34 subscribers on my YouTube channel with 500 hours of viewing or whatever it is, right? So it's, I'm creating the metrics to measure, but, part of it's like, is this measure meaningful? Does anybody care? At the end of the day, they want to see revenue. And it's funny because it's like, they were like, oh, if you've already made over like 50K, then you may not be eligible for it. So I said, I've made zippy on this, but I've made, I've made over 50K. I mean, I did over 6 figures over the last 12 months, which is fantastic, right? And I was still I was employed for a couple of those months. And so again, I'm just trying to keep it on the up and up, keep providing, maximum value to my clients, making sure they're happy and, will come back to me when they need me. But at the same time, leverage stuff like this to attract, newer entrants to the space. So one use case, honestly, was like, which NACE codes should I select in my SAM.gov registration? Oh, I don't know. What kind of business are you? Oh, you're your logistics? Okay, let's see what logistics is. And there probably isn't going to be one for logistics, but there's probably a ton for transportation, right? Which is logistics. So I got to spell it right. Oh, let's just do 4.8. Let's go some 4.8s here. What is 4.8? Air transportation. Let's do trucking, actually. That's probably one. Yeah, here we go. I don't know why. What's 484? General freight local, right? And then let's look at another one underneath that. General freight trucking long distance. Okay. So we got differences between a local company and a, intrastate company. And no surprise, markups are higher for local and they're cheaper for long distance, because in a long distance, you probably have more opportunities to scale. You're probably paid by the mile versus this is probably based by time. My 5 miles on a highway don't take more than 4.5 minutes, and then 5 miles in a city might take you an hour and a half.
Yeah,
depending on the route. So, but anyway, I thought it was again, it's kind of morphed into now that I got a better handle of the data, like, what does this tool do? What problems does it solve? And so part of it's like, oh, it'll help you identify a NACE code, based off of profitability, which I any industry with a higher markup, there's more opportunities for a larger profit, right? But again, every company is going to have their own secret sauce of how they, do their fringe overhead and G&As and what kind of margins they expect. But again, I would use this as you shouldn't be charging more than $81 an hour. Or, again, this data is old, but, I would take, 15% on top of this, right? And say that would probably be where you're at. So that's what I said in what I would do with the money. I said I would put another 5K into adding the labor piece. I have a big freaking table from the BLS with labor categories and locations, but I don't know how to put it together in a UI, right? But and then I was like, I'd spend another 2K or maybe 3K on better statistics, so I can look at this 20 years of data and I could predict what it should be in 2023, because that's what everybody cares about. No one cares about what happened 5 years ago or 20 years ago.
Right. Yeah.
Right. But I feel like there's enough of a data where a simple trend analysis, but again, I can do that, but I need some help with, people who are actually statisticians or, data scientists. Cause I can pretend to be one, but when I talk to real data scientists, I'm like, I'm not worthy.
Yeah. Like I said, I'm a spreadsheet guy. I can derive, data from that. But yeah, when you talk to somebody that like, hey, I don't just kind of do this when I have to for a little project. This is what I do. It's a little different outcome, but I can see why, or I can see why, these folks that you're submitting to, may not understand exactly what you're going for without, really talking to them, because, this is pretty specific, unique stuff that, a lifestyle coach wouldn't be doing. So, it really does warrant, probably sitting down to explain, what this is, why it's valuable, because, a layman person that's just reviewing applications may not really understand exactly what you're doing if they're not from this world. You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, that's kind of where I'm like, it's got a couple use cases depending on where a company is in their journey, right? And that's where I've kind of evolved my brand PTW. I don't correct people when they say PTW's price to win. I mean, that is what I initially intended out. But when I moved out of DC and realized I started talking to more business owners that didn't know what these were, and it's like, oh, I created a kind of a different sales funnel to capture more of the newbies, right? The people who are just kind of getting in the space. And, then I was like, oh, well, PTW can mean planning to win. Here's what USA Spending is. Here's how to find customers of the stuff that you're doing. And then, okay, well, here's how we position. We look at RFIs and sources sought, and we figure out ways that we can give our company a leg up during the pre-solicitation for the opportunities to shape bids. And then obviously the goal is to get sole source contracts because you're the only one responding to these things. But as we know, the government doesn't like to do sole sources, and that's fine. But and most companies don't get sole sources
unless you're
well, yeah, unless you're an ANC. Or an A sometimes. But again, there's nothing wrong with that as long as, and again, I think it's important for us taxpayers, and as a contracting officer, you always want to have at least 2 bidders, but you don't want to evaluate 20 bids either. So what's the sweet spot, right?
Yeah.
And so one of the reports I have out of SAM will kind of tell me, like, I can look at any particular agency and I can see which bids had 1 bid or 2 bids or 7 bids or 99 bids. And then, whether those were LPTA or best value trade-offs and all those things. And I wanted to, I have a report in SAM I'm pulling in a different screen because I want to just run this real quick. So this is USA Spending here. And I have a bid on the table with another software company to provide a secondary API into SAM.gov, because I do think there's additional data in SAM that is not available in USA Spending, specifically number of bids, number of offerers, right? So I'm going to pull this up real quick. Can you see the SAM screen I have, little ad hoc reports?
Yeah.
All right. So I have this report where I'm going to drill this into 584110. This should tell me I'll probably get a lot more data than I want on this particular report, but I think things that are important, like these are the highest product service codes, right? So these are all the product service codes that are in SAM.gov, right? And then who the bidder or who the agencies are, the top level, who's buying, logistics services as quantified by this NACE code, which is what again? General freight, local spending, or local general freight. But then you're looking at stuff like, oh, well, one local freight is for liquid propellants, fuels. So that's, that needs a hazmat, that needs a different type of truck, right? Than a moving truck. So again, I just trying to generate some of the curiosity in the users of, okay, I'm in this. So here's I can do, should I ship medical stuff? Should I do labs? Should I go for fuel? And again, where is the money, right? Because that's what everybody cares about. You want to be able, looks like relocation's a big one. DOD spent, $7 billion in that right there. Now, this report doesn't have the years on it yet, but anyway, it's just kind of a natural iteration to where, one kind of blog post I've been kicking around is how to weaponize a NACE code. If you're a $1 billion software company and you're 450 people, hey, we want to use the 334 starting with NACE code with a 500 employee base size standard. So anyway, baby steps, but I'm confident.
It's all data, but if you can quantify it in a way that maybe they aren't utilizing or thinking of, I mean, that's, give them new data points that gives them some advantage. I mean, that's what you got to do there. And I think that there's value to that. You just have to do
right.
You have to back in like, hey, here's a new way that I bet you're not looking at how to maximize,
Yeah. And the other part of it was banking. Like, would you want to invest in this industry? Looks like more people are coming in, more establishments are coming in. It's getting more competitive. Maybe it's getting more people. Here's what the wages are doing. Looks like the average pay is getting up, but the average, so the firms are getting more efficient. They're doing more work with less people. So I got a 2:00, Kris.
Sure.
But appreciate your time and let me share this with you. If you have any other feedback, let me know. Again, I'm just trying to add some nuts and bolts as I, have some additional money and my software guy has time, but I'm super happy with where I'm at right now. I just am kind of at a point where I'm not precisely sure what the path forward is. So
maybe that's something that, I mean, not necessarily with me, but maybe, one of the kind of folks or mentors that you've been kind of working with, or other folks, that, find someone to reach out to and just kind of say, hey, I'm at this point where, I need to accelerate it. I need to take the next step, be like a contract officer, go get several points of feedback and see if you can find like,
themes. Yeah. That's what I've been kind of doing. So I got to bounce. So good talking to you, buddy. Have a great one.